which is something that we're going to talk about. Why is that happening?
Right.
And the CSS Box Model basically describes what are all the components of an element on the page. It's not just the content, right? It's also all the things that go around it. So you can think of the CSS Box Model as actually just a box. There's some content in the middle, and then between the content and the border, which you can set to a certain style, you could have the padding. So everything that's sort of inside here is inside the element, and then outside of this is the margin, which is basically the space that you want other elements to stay away from you on. So a good way to think about this is, for instance, if you set the background of this entire element, it would go sort of like this in sort of color. It would go from the padding on, right?
Okay.
So that would encompass all of the color, but the margin would stay clear because that's sort of viewed as outside of the border of it. Now, so the margin is a space outside of an element. The border is the visible border around the element. And the padding is a space within the element, but outside of the actual content that you have inside of it. This is kind of a little bit confusing because when you think about when you think about the size of a box, you don't really think about the size of it, including like some space around it. You're really thinking about the size of a box, right? So if you had a cardboard box and you're measuring the side of it, you would be measuring from the outside of the box on one side to the outside of the box on the other side. You wouldn't necessarily go inside it and just like measure how much the box can store. That doesn't really make sense as a way of measuring. And so there's something called the box sizing attribute that really changes this and makes that much easier. So basically, instead you can change this to border box so that it will actually measure your when you're doing width, it'll measure from here to here, and that'll be sort of the width of the box, and which I think makes sense when you're talking intuitively about an element. And then here to here, I don't really know how to use Zoom It, so I'm just drawing squares as lines, or drawing boxes as lines.
That's good.
Hope that's okay with you guys. So yeah, so now if you're using the box sizing as border box, this would be the height, and this would be the width, instead of before where it would encompass other things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And the box sizing, that's one of those new attributes that we talked about. So
that's a CSS3 thing.
Yeah, it's a CSS3 thing. So you set it to be. So it does actually need a vendor prefix specifically for Mozilla Firefox. So you're going to actually need two things. You're going to need a border box. You're going to need to set box sizing, and you're also going to set -moz-box sizing.
Unfortunately, Visual Studio does that for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But those are just some of the quirks that we talked about with CSS implementation, and this is one of the places where it does come up. So where are the places that we need to actually set box sizing on our page? Well, a good example is actually right here in the header. So let's say we want our text here to not be we want our text to be more centered vertically in our header. So to do that, maybe we can add in some padding on top to kind of push the element down a little bit. Now, what would that look like?
That's a good question. What would that look like?
Yeah, so you would set that in header, and you basically set some padding to basically push elements down inside of it down a little bit. And you can do padding. You can do padding top to just basically set the top of that to, I'm going to say, 10 pixels.
By the way, while you're there, can I ask you a real quick side question? Because there's a question in the Q&A about the z-index.
Okay. Yeah, the z-index is, okay. So I'll explain why we need it first, and I think that would make a lot more sense.
Yep.
So on this page, you'll see as we're scrolling down,
everything else goes behind.
Yeah, everything is going behind this. And by default, things are at z-index 1. By setting the z-index to a higher number, you're basically saying this element is in front of all the other elements. If we set it to something like -1, then all the other elements would kind of go in front of it, which doesn't make sense as a fixed header, because then you can't really see it anymore. Things are getting in the way. So that's why I'm setting the z-index.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I just set it to 10. So I like to set things by order of magnitude, not by like 1, 2, or 3. I think it makes things a lot more clear, and that way you can have some granularity if you need it.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm setting this padding top to 10 pixels for this unfinished page. And you'll see that if I refresh the page, I do have more of a padding on top, but it also pushes down the size. It also increases the size of this top header a little bit. And if we look in our F12 tools and we look at the header, we can actually see its layout size here. And you'll see that there's some padding here on top, in addition to the 70 pixels, right? And that sort of, and that increases in like a weird way, so that this entire thing becomes 80 pixels instead of 70. And we don't want that. We want it to be 70 forever. So the way that you can fix that is, like I said, you can set box sizing. So I'll just do box sizing, border box. And for our Mozilla, we'll just go in and do this. And that basically sets the border box specifically for Mozilla. The box sizing thing works the box sizing works out of the box for all the other browsers.
Out of the box? Box sizing, out of the box?
Haha. Unintentional pun, but I'm still going to take credit for it.
By the way, do this for me real quick. Hit a carriage return and type in box sizing again. And one of the things that everybody will notice, hit backspace, one more. Okay, you're going to have to delete it and bring it back up again. I just want the IntelliSense back up.
Okay.
The box. So you'll notice on box sizing that there's like a little pair of scissors that's next to that. So that's a snippet. So with that highlighted, if you hit tab twice, it'll automatically put in all of the different vendor-specific versions that you need, so that way you don't have to remember each one of them. So Visual Studio can actually do that for you.
That's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yep. Yeah.
And you can just change these elements directly.
Exactly. Yep.
It does have the WebKit box sizing here, but WebKit has now rolled that into their standards, so you don't need it anymore.
Right.
Unless you do want to target, older versions, in which case that's decent practice. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. But we'll go with that for now.
Okay. So we're going to save this, and now when you go and refresh this page, you'll see that this has again become 70 pixels. 10 pixels isn't a huge difference, so you might not be able to see it too clearly, but here, if I select this element, you can see now, it's kind of pushed in that element size a little bit to account for the padding.
Okay.
So now instead of it being 80 from like accounting for padding, now it's 70 even accounting for padding. And
that's on the F12 Tools, that layout tab, and that's showing you the full box, so that way you can see the sizing of the box and how everything's coming together.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, these can be really finicky, so it's nice to actually see all these things. Yep. And it's especially nice to have this, to have the element selection tool to be able to actually select these.
Yep.
Yeah, so we want to set the box sizing for that. And we also want to set and we don't need to set the box sizing for everything, but we might need to set the padding for some things. So I don't know if you guys can have noticed, but there's actually supposed to be, this huge title line here, a banner text that says add style with CSS Jumpstart. And that's completely hidden here. It's hidden behind the nav bar.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem. And the way I'm going to fix that is I'm basically just going to, in the hero block, which is comprised of basically everything in this blue box, I'm going to set some padding on top to basically push the elements inside down a little bit.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I want to show you guys how to set padding for basically all 4 sides at the same time.
Okay.
So instead of doing padding top, you could just simply do padding, and you can put in 4 values.
Okay.
And the values basically go top, right, bottom, left in that order.
So starting from the top, going clockwise.
Exactly.
So top right, bottom left.
Yeah. And so you put in 4 values. And for this, since I'm only setting top, I'm going to set 70, which is the size of the header, and then I'm going to do 0, 0, 0. I don't bother putting pixels in for the other ones because 0 is the same, basically on any scale. It's nothing. It's worth noting, right?
I suppose 0, 0.
Yeah. But if you do just omit the other numbers, then that basically gives you a 70 pixel padding all around. So on all 4 sides, it'll give you 70. Whereas if you set all each side separately, it'll know that you want all of them to be different.
Perfect.
In our case, it won't matter too much, but I'm just going to set it like this because that makes sense to me.
And now we can see add style with CSS.
Yeah, exactly. And now that's sort of pushed everything else down on the page, which is exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so now now the elements are sort of in the right positions on the page, but they're not aligned in the way that we want them to be,
right.
Or they're not floated on the side of the page like this that we want them to be. So we're going to talk about that next. What happens after you size elements?